not much help. Yeah, I'll just put it instead of my cell, I guess. No?
Perfect.
Does it make sense? No, maybe I'll
Tuck that in, yeah. You got great style, so we don't want to record.
You're too kind. Well, we have a color match, by the way.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon and welcome to today's Schemel Forum World Affairs Luncheon Seminar. My name is George Alicio. I'm Dean of the Weinberg Memorial Library and Director of the Schemel Forum. And as always, I'm delighted to have you here today for this special event. As always, I'd like to extend my gratitude to Munley Law for their ongoing support of the Schemel Forum and to our dedicated members whose engagement and curiosity make these gatherings possible. A special thanks goes to Dr. Andrew Berger, Professor Emeritus of Physics and Engineering, for facilitating today's important connection and helping to bring our distinguished guests to the University of Scranton. I am also pleased to thank Dr. Anna Jaskiewicz, Assistant Professor of Economics and moderator of the Polish Student Club, along with the Polish Student Club members, for joining us today and for enriching this international dialogue. Today, the Schemel Forum is honored to host Mateusz Sakowicz, Consul General of the Republic of Poland in New York. A career diplomat and appointed civil service officer, he brings extensive experience in international relations. In his remarks, the Consul General will offer global insights into Poland's evolving global role, the growing importance of cultural diplomacy, and the enduring link between security, prosperity, and democratic responsibility. Drawing from Poland's long history of resilience, he will highlight how freedom and democracy are not inherited, but renewed by every generation. His reflections remind us that Poland is not merely a country shaped by its past, but a vital partner and model for forward-looking leadership on the global stage, a nation whose story continues to affirm that resilience, reform, and renewal, and shows us that these virtues are essential to freedom everywhere on the globe. So please join me in warmly welcoming Consul General Mateusz Sakowicz.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon. It's already afternoon. Thank you so much for this kind invitation. I mean, you've put a lot of pressure on me since you've referred to all these important points that I had in the back of my mind. We'll see if I can live up to these expectations of mine and yours. But in any case, thank you so much for having me here in Pennsylvania. It's lovely to be here. The drive itself, it's a reward from Manhattan. But unfortunately, it's no longer our immediate field of responsibility. I'm referred to this very state. Our field has sort of shrunk, but from the Consular General's perspective, but the list of tasks hasn't. I understand that many of you happen to have Polish roots. Maybe some are even 100% Polish or arrived from our country. So you'll forgive me if I make any mistakes or I present any misconceptions. It's entirely on me. It's not an official governmental, neither foreign ministry's position. I'll try to speak off the cuff, hopefully somewhat interesting. And I would invite you, of course, to interrupt at any point in time if you wish, if I sound unclear or if I make some bizarre comments. And I understand we'll also have a Q&A session on top of my intervention, so we can elaborate a little bit more on various topics. I've been figuring out how to make it somewhat not overly detailed and not too boring, hopefully. And being a diplomat, you don't have a specific, most of the time, education. I mean, some are economists, others are historians. I've graduated political science, so it's a bit of everything. And I believe it's difficult to find over field of work, but the diplomacy to try to merge this. In other words, I couldn't practice law, I couldn't be a proper economist, yet I can be a diplomat. Whether talented or not, I don't really know. I've only started my 20th year, a couple of days back, and I will need to take some tests apparently the following year, and they will figure out whether I'm still right for the job, which took me by surprise, but we increase our standards. In any case, what I'd like to maybe refer to in particular is, or to start with is, well, when you look at the map of Europe and you look at the history of Europe, well, Poland is really anchored there. What I mean by that is, well, this year we were celebrating, and to a certain degree also in the US, of course, our long 1,000 years history. In other words, the coronation of King Bolesław Chrobry took place in Gniezno, and I'm actually passionate about that city, the first capital of Poland, because I live 20 minutes drive from Gniezno. It took place literally 1,000 years back. At that time, of course, it was a coronation, so far from the current democratic concept. For the following centuries in medieval times, and might sound unpopular, well, of course, we were among the biggest in terms of size countries in Europe, and again, the oldest, next to Germany, next to France, England, Kingdom of Hungary at the time, top 5, I would say. But in terms of distributing, for instance, wealth, we were actually lagging behind, and we were lagging behind for centuries. It might be unpopular thesis because you would recall, if you could maybe put next slide, or do I do that? I don't know how to operate that. Because I won't bore you with slides, I prefer to, oh, okay.
I think this is.
Yeah, I just wanted to maybe present a couple of slogans or terms, and hopefully, okay, I'll play around with that. Yeah. Something maybe that stands in your memory. Yeah, when I referred to the 17th century, we were the biggest country in Europe, really, in terms of the actual size. And we're relatively democratic, in a sense that we had gentry, and I mean, this elections and popular get-togethers, but in sense, the population itself wasn't represented. I mean, it was a small, in current terms, oligarchy that was running the country, and it was not surprising because, of course, many other countries were run exactly the same way. But certainly the distribution of wealth was not existing at that time. And we were, of course, surrounded by big powers. You certainly know the history, how it ended with 3 partitions of Poland, and Poland being erased from the map of Europe for long 123 years. Then again, one could argue that it was the geographic location, and certainly geographic location does play a role if you're isolated. It's completely different as opposed to being surrounded by superpowers of that time and at the same time being relatively flat. I mean, we used to be, and we still are to a certain degree, an agricultural country, which means it was really easy to overtake us if there was a massive opponent. And historically, there used to be massive opponents from pretty much all angles, all directions, so to say. But my point is that I think we never really lived up to the potential that we had as a country. Certainly not throughout the time prior to partition, during the partition. We sort of started living up to this potential during the interwar period, 20 years. It's nothing if you compare it now to 35 years of free Poland. I mean, and we had significant achievements at the time. Well, first I maybe should have mentioned that, of course, the US did play a role, and I refer, of course, to our transatlantic linkage. But my point is that, of course, there would be no free Poland if not for Woodrow Wilson, famous 14 points, including the 13th point, on the need of re-establishment of free Poland, and rightly so, and the Haller Army and what have you. So these circumstances were favorable at the time, and I think we really sort of tried to live as a country to our potential within these 2 decades. We were very advanced in terms of engineering, the international exhibition in New York. I'm sure some of you recall those, the beautiful building that we had. We had one of the best at the time, for instance, medium-size bombers that were completely invented by our engineers. Unfortunately, too few to stand up to Luftwaffe in September 1939. And I think the picture included in between those, the black and white picture of the battleship, German battleship paying a courtesy visit to free city Gdańsk at the time, and actually shooting in our garrison in Westerplatte from 4:45 a.m. on September 1st, 1939, shows that even though we were a brave nation historically, we were overrun at that point in time by the aggressive Hitler's Nazi Germany. And certainly, Second World War, as terrible as it had been for Poland, that might be again a disputable argument, but converted our society. I mean, it really uprooted our society. I'm referring to 6 million lives that were lost. 3 of those 6 million would be of Polish Jews. But it really made our country homogeneous. You would, I think, agree. So the Stalinist time, and then the Poland's People's Republic time, the Communist Poland, in other words, in the aftermath of the Second World War, that was a very homogeneous country. With various levels of intensity in terms of the regime and people taking to the streets. I'm sure you're familiar with those elements, but I just want to paint this broader picture so that I could swiftly transfer you over to contemporary state of affairs and contemporary portrait of my country of origin. So I'll spare you from the detail of the communist era, but of course it did take its toll, by all means. Many of you or your predecessors have actually decided to leave for the US, for that matter, because of the situation back home. Certainly communism didn't function whatsoever. It actually made things even worse in terms of distribution of wealth. If there was any wealth, that was again, I mean, the party that would be beneficiaries of that. And that's actually a system that is replicated throughout history and even these days. I mean, you have either oligarchic systems or you have democratic inclusive systems. And of course, this inclusiveness comes at a price, in a sense that, well, people can get wealthier, can stand up to the power, and ultimately can change power in the democratic way. That was difficult at the time, but yet 1989 happened, and luckily so. Again, Lech Wałęsa, John Paul II, significant figures, certain momentum, of course, that's also needed, so an element of luck, one would argue. But what I would put the emphasis on was the actual civilized, or let's say democratic to a certain degree, transition of power. That's very unique, and I think we also as Poles often underestimate it or take it for granted. I don't want to put fingers at anybody, but there were countries within our part of the world, which I consider Central Eastern Europe. I would perceive Poland as Central Europe, certainly westernized, so geographically centered now more towards west for sure. But my point is that that was a very significant point in time, and something that we should absolutely be proud of, and that's something to hopefully follow, and for many countries to look after. We're talking about 100+ countries that are in much worse position than any European, I'm talking Western Europe state, is these days. And there are elements that they could certainly look at. Sometimes even as Polish diplomacy, we tend to say that, you know, we haven't been colonizing anybody, and we had that wonderful transition that I referred to, and it's not always that easy to emulate this 100% and to follow this example, but I think there are elements at least. The roundtable discussions, right, with fierce oppositions on both sides, yet they came up with tangible solutions that enabled this bloodless transition of power. In the 90s, and the whole process of privatization of the state-owned companies, it wasn't without hiccups, but I think it was the only way to make it happen. And then I'm swiftly moving you to 2000s and onwards. I think what was absolutely crucial from today's standpoint was this decision of choosing the NATO membership and ultimately the EU membership as goals to attain, to obtain, to arrive at, and there was a political consensus with this regard. A side remark, 35 years of free Poland, we had about 20 plus governments, all spectrum, left, right, you can have your sympathies, but certain aspects were agreed upon, including these two memberships. NATO certainly on the security part of the equation, European Union in terms of access to free market, in terms of labor opportunities, in terms of cultural opportunities, in terms of choosing this, let's say, Western civilization model, something that, again, I think Poland normally belonged to, yet for various reasons already described, necessarily didn't really benefit from in the course of centuries. So we're talking 1999, accession to NATO and anchoring the security aspect with close collaboration with the US. This holds. The European Union 2004 May. Only recently we had actually already, I don't know how this time flies, 20 years anniversary of our presence within the EU. One of the certainly success stories, we were presiding over the Council of the European Union for the first half of 2025. As a matter of fact, this tie was manufactured for that occasion, so I'm very proud to have a piece of that, history in the making, one would argue. So these two elements were of pivotal importance. 2004, it was quite a significant migration from Poland, again for various reasons. Certainly unemployment rate relatively high, but again, nothing compared to 90s when we would have 20% of unemployment. Fast forward, as of December 2024, we had the lowest unemployment rate in the European Union, 3%. Imagine that. That's shocking, yeah. That's absolutely spectacular. Those people left in 2004, oftentimes in order to pursue better work opportunities, to study at universities. Some stayed in the UK mostly, I'd say, because at a certain point in time it was up to 800,000 that would leave for the UK and Ireland. Actually, I was one of those at the time. I lived in Ireland. That's where I was recruited by the Foreign Affairs Ministry. But that's just yet another anecdote. The fact of life is that a lot of these people in the course of time decide to return to the country of origin, and that's absolutely wonderful. We want to tap into this massive potential. At least in theory, we're talking about 20 million people of Polish origin across the globe. I mean, some of course will not consider it, but in terms of, let's say, education opportunities, life-work or work-life balance, in terms of quality of life, it's certainly something that comes up very frequently also in our conversations as diplomats, and there are programs also run by the Polish relevant ministries. One I've already described, where I touched upon in the conversation prior to this lecture, that has to do with encouraging young Polish professionals, or rather third country citizens of Polish origin, to consider going to Poland to study or to take up another course of studies and eventually work. There are some of the biggest companies operating in Poland, mostly privately owned. You're talking international companies too, Polish companies, and some state companies that still exist that offer internships, for instance. It might be interesting to some of your family members. That was one very successful project already in the summer. 100 plus people from mostly the US, Canada, and the UK went to participate, and over 20 stayed already. I mean, again, in relative terms, you can argue whether it's big or not, but I was shocked, it's like 20% decide to stay immediately after because of everything that I have described. So in any case, maybe to chip in with, I should have maybe switched a little bit to something so that something changes in the background. Economic transformation, yes, I think I've referred to that, succeeds when institutions, not only markets, are strong. Indeed, regardless of these political changes, and luckily we haven't had populists per se governing our country. There were different visions, more centralized, more right-wing. There were even so-called former communists or leftists in the government in 2000s, but luckily institutions haven't been disrupted as such, haven't been turned upside down. Central bank or what have you did fulfill their roles. And I think that also was instrumental in reassuring direct foreign investment. There is a significant American footprint in terms of foreign investment. We're talking about 1,600 big US companies present in Poland in all spheres that you can imagine, but mostly I'd say high technology. I don't want to point at any particular company, but computer industry, manufacturing. We're actually, as a matter of fact, super strong as Poland in IT sector. We have up to 500,000 of programmers, if that's the proper word, IT specialists. We are actually leaders or among top leading states with regards to computer games. I haven't played a computer game in 15 years or so, but apparently many young people still do. And there is big money involved in that. And one super successful computer game, The Witcher, which is actually an interpretation of a super successful Polish fantasy book, has been also now converted to a very successful Netflix series. So all in parallel. In terms of soft power, Americans are good at soft power, and we try to do our bit to the extent possible. So they are these, let's say, parts of the economy that we try to maximize, and we try to put particular emphasis on. What else would I like to add with this regard? Unemployment rate, I did refer to GDP growth, and that might take you by surprise. Continued GDP growth throughout last 30 years, we're second to China global-wise, second to China. But when you look at the purchasing power per capita, an average Chinese has a half of an average Pole. That's a massive success story. I think there are some professors now, luckily, that spread the message. You know, I mean, those of Polish origin would agree, I guess, that we are a little bit always like, you know, under the moon, the glass is half empty, that, well, yes, I've bought that new Mercedes, but it consumes so much gasoline, or BMW, or what have you. You know, this kind of thinking. But at the same time, we are really hardworking, passionate. We don't take things for granted. Normally, when I speak, again, side remark, with my compatriots living in the US, I never cease to be impressed. These are super hardworking people. First generation oftentimes would come to this country, would work, again, oftentimes, same in the UK, below their qualification. Yet the next generation children, these would be doctors, IT specialists, they would own construction companies rather than putting their muscles to work. And it's not a simplification, that's basically what it is. If I talk to my hairdressers in the heart of Greenpoint, that's exactly the story of her children, like moving up the ladder. And I think really pursuing this American dream. The fact of life is that there is no need now for Poles, luckily, to pursue American, British, German dream any longer. If they decide to do so, they do it voluntarily because of certain opportunities that there are. And there are opportunities simply by moving around, by traveling, by getting to know people of our cultures. That will always remain the case. I'm just saying that it's not this economic imperative that actually pushes them out of the country of origin. And for last 2 years, there have been more Poles returning to Poland than Poles migrating from Poland. I think it's super satisfactory, certainly. Certainly we're doing something right as a nation, as a country. Even with politicians, I think they are trying to be helpful and not always disruptive. So I'm proud of that. I'm proud of that, and I speak out loud about that because I think there are reasons to be to spread that word, to spread that knowledge, that message. I've been talking to my friends, colleagues at the table prior that I don't know when was your last visit, if you've had a chance of visiting Poland, but I'm shocked myself. If I go home once per year, I see those massive changes. If I go to my hometown in Greater Poland, close to Poznań, if I go to Warsaw for an annual get-together of all heads of missions, that I see vividly those changes, how cosmopolitic my country has become. There are students from all around the world pursuing their ambitions. There are businesses. You would have a fast food and you would have hardly any Pole, whether it's good or bad. I mean, again, one could argue, but I think it just comes, one could say maybe at a price, but I think it's a phenomenon of a developing state, that it, as wealth grows, as salaries increase, workforce is needed, and maybe to make this, being Polish, make this glass still half empty, not to make it overly too optimistic on this Friday afternoon. Let me say one thing that comes as a price, I guess, and it's again not unique to Poland. What really concerns us is the fertility rate. It's currently at the replacement level is at the rate 1.1, and normally, and I'm sure experts in economy and statistics and what have you would correct me, but normally 2.1 is a minimum to have this proper replacement level. Now, it's not unique when you look at the whole Western Europe, and that's where I place ourselves, as I did stress already. That's all across the board. What do we do about it? It's not an easy one. Social transfers were sort of used. They were thought that they would work to this effect, hardly so. It's not only about money, apparently. And when we think about it, I maybe see some merit. I mean, it's not about only how financially successful or affluent we are. It's also other elements like security of employment, various services, education, health systems, and so on and so forth. It's a difficult issue. In a way, in the, as I did say, perverse way, the ongoing war in Ukraine, the unprovoked Russian aggression, did cause a spillover side effect that did help our economy in a sense that we accepted approximately up to 1 million of Ukrainians. And of course, it was a humanitarian effort, and again, something to be proud of, because this was, before it happened to be an effort on the governmental side, it was first the Poles' effort by opening their homes, by bringing people over, by welcoming them and letting them stay in this harshest circumstances one can imagine for their home country. But we received this million, and out of that million, the vast majority, these are mostly women, by the way, and oftentimes with children, right? I mean, men would stay to defend their country for what has been now, 3 years plus. That's a topic for another discussion. But of course, we don't live in a vacuum, right? It has an immediate, direct impact on the situation back home. But they work, they contribute, they pay taxes. They have all the same opportunities in terms of social welfare, services, education that Polish citizens have. And this is working fine. There have been no hiccups so far. I hope that there are no politicians. Every now and then somebody shows up that tries to exploit that. But for the time being, luckily, it's sort of stable. Certainly many of them would like to return, and I hope that they will manage to return to the country of origin once this terrible war comes to an end. We still have some time. So speaking of war, let me take you swiftly from that economic elements that long-term growth, I did say, innovating forward, certainly. We have to remain innovative, not to just stay as a reservoir of relatively cheap labor. As the country develops and grows, we are less and less so, basically. Our workforce costs more. So putting together simple elements, simple whatever, pieces at the factory is no longer an issue, right? We need qualified, educated workforce so that we still have this competitive advantage. But we try our best. Yes, I referred to, that's the NATO symbol, logo, if you wish, if my memory serves me right. Of course, I did emphasize the ongoing war for other reasons because of the spillover effect and the people that we received. But if I were to spell out, if you gave me 10 seconds and I was to pronounce just one important thing from Poland these days, that would be certainly the security aspect. I'm sure that many of you have seen that our aerial space was breached. And again, toute proportion gardée, as they say in French, it's nothing compared to what the Ukrainians experience daily. I'm talking bombing, missile strikes, indiscriminatory strikes, and what have you, targeting civilians. But it showed it was a conscious Kremlin decision, that's a given, to deploy unarmed, yet mixture of drones in September to violate, was it September, October, September, to violate our airspace, but in other words, NATO airspace, to test the defensive systems. I think they were quite successful and NATO stood up. I mean, there were various planes deployed, including Polish planes, but also the Dutch planes took off, which were responsible for protecting our airspace. The AWACS type of reconnaissance plane was in air that was crewed by the Italians. So you see, like, that's not just, I'd say, treaties written, but it actually makes a difference in real life. We'll see whether any follow-up attempts will take place or won't, but I think we live in relatively, or if not relatively, let's cross out the word relatively, in turbulent times. Yeah, everybody refers to this famous quote that the history was supposed to be over, far from being so. And we actually live and breathe those changes. And when I'm back home and when I even go to this is all recorded. In any case, okay, if I interact with my colleagues, only then I realize that everything is really perceived through the lens of security situation. I mean, we all have our everyday tasks, and yes, you mentioned that the consular job, it's a whole spectrum. It's dealing with the city authorities, by the way, new city authorities in New York, and new mayor. You deal with massive Polonia. You deal with Americans, third country citizens. You issue visas, and so on and so forth. And that's within the purview of my team's daily responsibilities. Every now and then you have such a wonderful occasion like going to Pennsylvania, talking and meeting you. But if you go home, you see that this is not only Ukrainians, and to a certain degree Belarusians, that you meet on the streets, but it's also this kind of sentiment or that feeling in the air, right? That even though it has been going on for 3 years, it's there, right? I mean, we're talking war, something that should be actually certainly eradicated from our vocabulary in 21st century, realistically speaking, yet, and honestly speaking, yet, it's a fact of life. And yeah, and I'm not in a position to predict how this whole story unfolds, but for the record, let me say that with this regard in particular, our transatlantic link is absolutely as solid as ever. Poland spends 4.7 GDP this year on defense. And of course, there are other needs. Even for a country that has just reached top 20 in a sense of economic success, we're G20, not yet members of the G20 group, very exclusive groups, but on the best trajectory to become a member. In the actual economic terms, yes, we have joined the group. But then you have various exchange rates and depends how you count things, but yes, indeed, or we are either on the verge or actually G20 state. And actually spending so much on defense, of course, prevents us from investing in other various fields that I've also alluded to. But again, that's the reality. Luckily, we have top equipment in the U.S. and excellent collaboration with the U.S. industry. We purchased the most advanced F-35 multi-role jets. We've purchased Abrams tanks, and actually, maybe something that might be interesting for you. Polish taxpayers' money is spent at least in 15 U.S. states on various equipment. I've already referred to jets, Apache helicopters in Arizona, radio stations in Syracuse, New York. So there are bigger and smaller things that we purchase, but it certainly underpins our alliance. So does significant purchase of LNG gas. It's going on for several years now, and there are contracts already signed for 20 years forward. That was an effort to make ourselves independent, and of course there was a political motivation, but we wanted to become entirely independent from anything that comes from Russia. And again, being honest, what else do they have to offer, right? Soft power, or, well, I don't know. They've had culture indeed, but I mean, look what they've done to themselves. But except for oil and gas, no, it's paper tiger, really. Now, actually, in the Chinese pocket, to be frank. So we're independent, energy-wise, something that we've also been urging our European member states to do. And speaking of energy, we are in the process of preparation of, or building, ultimately, the first Polish nuclear power plant. And there is US technology also engaged, Westinghouse. It should come to realization in 2039 from what I've read, but we are on the best trajectory to make it happen. So we kind of step up our game with this regard too. And the US plays a pivotal role. Right, we still have maybe a few minutes before I take any questions you might have. Resilience, reform, renewal. Yes, I think I've made side remarks to all those notions. We've been resilient throughout history, but nothing is taken for granted. We need to reform and reinvent ourselves continuously. And by doing so, I genuinely believe that we also have something to offer to the broader world. That success story that I've referred to in Europe and global-wise, that's something that I think we can try to promote even to the greater degree that we've been doing so far. And there are interests from other states. Sometimes it's not entirely transferable, but even when you talk to certain African states, they benefit, for instance, from IT technologies that we have, from certain machinery that we produce, and so on and so forth. The fact being is that when I mentioned this 100+ states, there is a big burden on them too. In other words, if you don't have an inclusive, open society, and that very much depends on the elites. And if the elites become petrified and don't want to leave power, then we have an issue. But those that decide to follow Western standards are normally successful, right? All those countries that have decided to, and I'm not talking to follow precisely given country, I'm just talking about partition of power, something that Montesquieu has invented, so it's not rocket science. You know, independent judiciary system, and so on and so forth. Accepting direct investment, competition, right? As opposed to oligarchic division of fruits of people's hard labor. And then another thought that comes to my mind is only by choosing such a pattern, such a model, we prevent ourselves from actually reverse and from risking that populists take over power because they come and by selling simplified solutions to very difficult questions that normally don't function, by the way, those solutions win popular support because people cannot feel that. And to a certain degree, it has been a Polish experience that I think now we try to let's say, rethink or learn from this lesson that these achievements and fruits, if they just become statistical numbers, right? I mean, GDP growth, if I don't see that, I don't know, have a bus stop or my child gets a better education, I mean, does it really make a difference? People don't study those numbers normally. So I think that has to be translated into every people's life. And if they see a difference, well, then they are more willing to pay taxes to start with. But it's a whole different discussion. But I'm referring to from concrete examples. I'm trying to extrapolate it to a slightly bigger level. because I think that we, as a country, we deal with, still try to find this balance. Yeah, I think I'm nearing towards the end, but something that I also wanted to attract your attention to, sometimes symbols matter, and in May this year, that's only a printout, but that was the cover of the Economist magazine, weekly. So, I mean, simple as it gets, right? Our national colors. Poland, 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 the remarkable rise of Poland. Yeah, I think that it's not only us preaching or doing public diplomacy from the, relatively satisfactory diplomatic standpoint, but also the broader world and the specialists that I wouldn't argue with pick up too. So I think we're on the best trajectory ever because of various reasons that I've tried to describe. So the glass becomes more and more full from our standpoint. If the circumstances remain relatively favorable, if there is security, we have all the good chances to become a hub of prosperity. We're already quite affluent. We are secure in terms of internally. If you walk in the middle of the street, I often took to my American Jewish friends, and I don't want to now, navigate towards the Gaza situation and this aspect. But even in light of those developments for the last 2 years now, no? From October 7th, they feel always safe, and they say like, oh, I can walk in the middle of the night in Krakow, in Warsaw, nobody bothers me. And then they start pointing fingers at some country and they say, I wouldn't dare to do this there. And it kind of boosts my morale too. I say, okay, that's really good. I'm glad that, you feel also oftentimes at home, because these people have Polish origins. Some of them were even born in my home country. So that makes me extremely happy. And I hope things stay on this trajectory as I expressed. I think I've wanted to, we've navigated towards questions and discussions. I wanted to throw at you a couple of pictures as if I were a tourist agent, but I think they speak for themselves. Well, the communist symbol still standing there in the heart of Warsaw, but I think it adds to the history of the city, so let it be. Some other pictures of our seaside from the Baltic to the Tatra Mountains, old markets and what have you, because there is oftentimes this association. Why would I go to Poland? Well, I would go there because there is Krakow and and cuisine and kiełbasa and pierogis, as they say in the US, which I love because it's a plural. It's super funny for me always. I started using this term. It's addictive. And we've had some pierogis, lovely by the way, earlier today. So it's this, right? And by any means, I don't want to underestimate this traditional potential and offer of my home country. It's there. It's not gone by any means. But there is this too. Same palace, but some skyscrapers, the tallest, what do you call it? It's not a balcony where you have like a roof. No, it's not a rooftop. When you go to Empire State Building or Freedom Tower, you have? Correct, observation deck. The tallest observation deck is in Warsaw. Wonderful hotels, thriving economy, thriving city, cosmopolitic, safe. Yeah, I thought that I would bring Christmas presents from TJ Maxx. No need, there are TJ Maxxes there. So. All right, I'll stop here. I'll be very eager to take any questions you might have. If I've made any mistakes, it's entirely my fault. I tried to speak off the cuff and be as genuine as a diplomat can be, as they say. And I hope you have some interest in what I had to say, and maybe you want to make a comment or ask a supplementary question. I certainly hope. I look forward to those. Thank you so much for your attention. Thank you. I appreciate it. We still have 15 minutes or so? Perfect. Yeah, sure.
I first have a comment. question. Is there an issue? Are there any conflicts there?
Thank you for your kind of. I think, yes, I'm wholeheartedly for the tripartition of powers I've just expressed. I think there are various takes on judiciary systems. Nothing is cast in stone. I understand that sometimes various systems, including diplomacy, need reforms. And of course, politicians have divergent views of how those reforms should or could be conducted. And there was, and still is to a certain degree, a significant difference in terms of perceptions between some of the major parties back home. And I think that's what you might be referring to. But again, it's not my immediate field of responsibility. I'm more on the international affairs side of the equation. I do follow news from home, certainly. But then again, there are means to deal with it. There is the parliament, and there is the democratically elected majority, as it had been prior when certain changes were introduced. I certainly hope that certain how shall I best put it, difficulties that we experience within this sphere will be hopefully resolved. That I'm referring now to the role of the Constitutional Tribunal and so on and so forth. I think on the one side, certain changes are probably, and reforms are always worth looking at, but it's not a domain that likes sudden changes. And I think it should be treated in as an independent, its independent role should be guarded. That would be my, a bit maybe descriptive comment on your very, actually adequate question, sir. Any other questions or comments you may have? Others, a lady. Yes, ma'am.
You spoke about people. You spoke about people coming back to Poland. You spoke about people emigrating from Ukraine. How about other countries? Do you see, with an increase in economic, the GDP and growth and your economic prosperity, do you see people from other countries coming to Poland?
Absolutely. If I were to compare Poland 15, 20 years back now to current times, it's a massive difference. As I mentioned, in particular for many Asian countries, I think it's a very attractive country to consider. Well, again, don't want to blame anybody because, there is this Latin American state, for instance, and at a certain point in time, Poland became really high on the agenda for emigration, and that it did cause some issues in terms of organized crime, for instance. So we had to look into that. What I'm alluding to is that accepting people from other countries needs to be done in a very thought-through way and manner. If it's not, then it raises, if not immediate, then mid-term consequences, and it's to the detriment of the home country and to those people, by the way. And I think we try to learn the lesson of other Western states that for various reasons, sometimes historical reasons like being former colonialists, maybe they have to pay their dues in a certain symbolic way, but they have been experiencing difficulties. We try to avoid that. And I don't think I will break any confidential info if I say that actually my country will be looking into introducing additional requirements prior to accepting people emigrating for, let's say, developing countries. What I mean by that is we can't allow ourselves to have additional burden on the social system, because then again, it's a spillover effect, and there will always be politicians that will benefit from it and will exploit it, and then that leads nowhere. But I think, and again, I said we will need, again, some politicians wouldn't agree for whatever reasons, but we will need a couple of more million people up until 2050. There are 38 million people in Poland these days, and it is assumed that there will be about 32 25 years from now. So we need somehow to fill this gap, and that has to be done in a structured, thought through, and controllable manner. With the Ukrainian friends of ours, I think it has been easier in a way. Proximity of cultures, history, even languages. If you talk about cultures with different history, religion, and so on and so forth. I'm not against that. I'm just saying that proportions are of utmost importance, that it has to be done in a controllable way. And I'm positive that we will, I'm certainly hopeful, but I have a feeling that we'll be successful in conducting this, learning from other countries' experiences. But I don't think that there is really an alternative unless people start, unless there is a better fertility rate, which for the time being, and again, it's a cultural thing too, right? I mean, different role of women in the family, ambitions, and that's fair. That's the fact of life. So we cannot go back to the point of my parents' generation, for instance, so women giving birth in their early 20s and so on and so forth. The world has changed, and it's not longer. When I refer to challenges, for instance, I think in a sense we are following the U.S. pattern because we've become a very individualist country in the sense of society, if you know what I mean. That's something that bugs me a little bit. That in the past we were more kind of family-oriented and friends-oriented. Now, because of the opportunities there and the pace of life and social media and so on and so forth, it's a complex picture, but I think people hardly ever talk to one another. That's what I see back home. That's what I see at work. That's what I see in every aspect of life. I talk to my father on WhatsApp or Skype, and I feel like I'm off the hook. No, it's done. It's ticked off, and I can postpone my visit to my hometown for yet another couple of months. So, yeah, it's complex. But thank you for raising this.
Thank you for your enlightening lecture today. My son-in-law, he's a Swedish diplomat. He was the deputy ambassador to Lithuania. He
Excellent.
Just left there. And the feeling in Lithuania is no longer if they are invaded, but when. How vulnerable does Poland feel?
I see. Well, congratulations, by the way. That's a wonderful diplomatic service, top professionals. Actually, I had a side remark before I try to address your question. I was participating in a meeting at the Consulate of Sweden in New York a week ago with Carl Bildt, former Prime Minister. Top quality, intellectual, top quality. When he spoke about the Ukrainian case and the scenarios, it was like, that was enlightening. I wish I could be that eloquent one day in the future. We'll see. So you're saying that their overall perception is that it's sort of imminent in a sense.
Yes.
I mean, we can question. I don't think that we share this rather pessimistic view, but we don't underestimate it by any means. And when I mentioned about this ambience, if you wish, or sentiment that is there among the leaders, among the hierarchy, among the ministers, among the diplomats, is that this is of utmost importance. Once the security is assured, then we can deal with other things, and oftentimes to the detriment of other important aspects of life or governing a country. I mean, they have to be put aside. And I think that's exactly what we do. When I mentioned about purchasing weapons, creating the biggest army in Europe, it's not something that we volunteered for. But when you think about that the Kremlin decision maker, his history and his kind of perception of things, I mean, those type of people, they only respect power. If you show weakness, I mean, you can already kind of lay your weapons down, and we historically know what happens if you decide to do so. That's why Ukrainians fight so bravely, right? I mean, there is no alternative for their survival. And by the way, it has never been about Donetsk or 4 oblasts or this party, or area of Ukraine. It was from day one. Remember, it was supposed to be 3-day special operations that drags on for 4 years now, close to 4 years. It was about overturning power, right? And maybe parachuting some puppet master in Kiev. That was about this. It wasn't about, I mean, that's what they try to present now after this massive failure, because it's a failure on the Russian side. But no, so I don't personally share that sentiment, but I don't underestimate the risk by any means. I just think that, what's that phrase, hope for the best, prepare for the worst, this type of thing? Yeah. Yes. Thank you, ma'am.
I guess I am the last one question. My name is Andrew Berger. Took over a year to break our Consul General here.
Thank you for your initiative.
But to comment on that picture, if you look at Warsaw, I've been there 2 months ago. It's a wonderful European city. If you go there for 2 weeks, probably you bring 10 pounds with you. Food is unbelievable, especially the pastry. What you see in the center, well, it's very clean, very green, lots of spaces to really rest. It's a high, luxurious level, right? City, Western city. What you see in the center, it was for 50 years symbol of oppression, something that was imposed by Soviets. I think the only Soviet bloc country that experienced that gift, built by Polish people with Polish material. And when I was in Moscow, I saw 5 of them similar. I think inspiration was Empire State Building, just fatter version. And when Poland got independence, I think there was a very serious consideration to raise it from the ground, because in 1970s, when I was still a student, I was on a side tour guide for foreign students. And when I was picking them up in Warsaw, I said, when you go to the top of this for observation deck, you have the most beautiful view of Warsaw. Why? Because you don't see that object, right? That was really the ugliest thing you could imagine. So they wanted to erase it, but when they figured out the cost of taking it down, it immediately hands down, and they said no. Similarly, if you remember, in 1970s, they considered to raise the largest, I think, city hall in the world, which is Philadelphia. And they tried to think to close it, erase it, but the cost of removing all that material, they just kept it, painted it, and half of Philadelphia City Hall is closed. So anyway, it serves now as a symbol around. There's very close, not too far, is a Jewish ghetto, which is very open right now. There's also Polin Museum.
The Jewish Museum.
Talking about Lithuania, Lithuania has only 2 million people. It's a very tiny country, but there's no borders right now. If you start in Warsaw, you go like to New York City, you go to Vilnius, and then there's a Riga, Latvia, and a little bit farther there's a Tallinn, right? So it's all open. What happened when I visited those countries, basically Soviets in 1940s, overnight stepped in, just took it. There was no fight, nothing. How can you go oppose 100-some million people, counting only 2?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much for coming and
Thank you for
visiting
these additional
us.
remarks. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was excellent. We really appreciate having you.
Of course. Thank you. Thank you once again.
Chciałby pan
Dzięki.
jakieś 10-15
Tak,
minut?
tak, mam.
To ja pokażę trochę
Dobra, uniwersytet?
do widzenia, żeby pan miał
Dobra,
pamiętał.
dobrze, super, pewnie. Oh yeah, of course. I hope it wasn't too boring, no?
No, it was fantastic. It really was.
Thanks, you're too kind. Okay, hold on. Oh, here it is.
That's your phone. That's your phone. Just wanted to- there we go.